Hi, today we're going to talk about creativity. It's been on my mind a lot, like for most of my life. But before we do, we're going to talk about my tea for the day. Today I'm drinking Twinings, and it's the Darjeeling tea, which is raised in the Himalayan mountains, and it is absolutely delicious. And I've got it in I think this is a Natural Life cup that one of my sons gave me for Christmas one year. His birthday is this week, so happy birthday to my son. You know which one you are. And thank you for the cup. I'm still using it and enjoying it after all these years. Cheers. Okay, so do you consider yourself a creative person? A lot of us don't, and I think that's kind of unfortunate because I think that is our birthright as human beings. We are all created to be creators. I think we're all here for a purpose. How do you discover that? That's the problem. So I've had some issues with this throughout my life, and I thought today we would just kind of go over what I've learned, and maybe you could share your experiences with me as well. I also have some pointers for you, and I have some things that I think might be helpful to you if you're wanting to explore your creativity and are not sure where to begin. This is a video for beginners. This is not for people who want to make a lot of money making quilts or whatever. There are plenty of other options out there for you. There are books to read. There are YouTube channels galore on how to make money at whatever endeavor you're interested in. I'm not even going to talk about how to make money with writing today because, well, we'll discuss that a little bit more later. It's a complicated subject. But that's not the point today. The point is, if you're at a place in your life where you're feeling bored, you're feeling stuck, you're feeling unsatisfied for whatever reason, I think it might be time for you to tap into your creativity. And some people have no problem with that, but other people really struggle with it. As I have said, I have written 2 nonfiction books. I have also written, just finished actually, a series of books in paranormal women's fiction, which is about a woman in her late 50s who loses her husband and inherits a lot of money from him, but doesn't know what to do with herself. So she moves to this quaint little North Carolina mountain town and buys a used bookstore. And she moves in and discovers that the place is already inhabited by fairies. And madness ensues, all sorts of things happen from there. That's the first book. The second book is about her daughter who is having problems, and I'll talk more about that in future videos, not today, but the second video focuses on her 28-year-old daughter, Olivia. And the final book is sort of a love triangle, but it's also a mystery and sort of a thriller. So, but I do have some experience. I have spent the last 5 years of my life actually being a fairly creative person. Up to that point, not so much. And at the very end, if you stick around, the last thing we're going to talk about is the book I just finished, Robert Lowell, Setting the River on Fire, A Study of Genius, Mania, and Character by K. Redfield Jamison. This is a book about creativity. This is a fabulous book. Actually, I would have to say this is one of the best books I've read probably in the last 10 years of my life. I was really taken with it, and I'll talk about that at the end. So first off, why create? I think that it's necessary to get through life well to be creative. And I also think it's a great way to entertain yourself. You know, we've all gotten so used to just being entertained at the click of a button by picking up our phones or whatever. But actually, it's much more fulfilling and much more entertaining to create things yourself. And it's also fun. You know, it's good to do things that you just enjoy. It is hard to be creative at something you know nothing about. I have 2 sons who are musicians. My husband he fiddles with music. He knows a little bit about playing guitar and things like that, and he's actually a pretty good vocalist. I know nothing about music. I took band in high school. I never really learned to read music. I can't look at music written out and hear it in my head like some people can. I can't tell the difference between a sharp and a flat. So music is probably not a very good area for me to aspire to be creative in. And as a matter of fact, it would probably be futile and very frustrating. Although I think it could be done. It would just take a lot of work. And that's not what I'm going for here. I'm not going for let's sweat ourselves to death and try to, just grit our teeth and get really good at something. We need to be reasonable about it. And really, if you have to work so hard just to get a basic level of competence, is that fun? I mean, maybe for you it is. For me, it's not. So that's not what we're talking about. So yeah, the first place to look for a clue to what you might want to do is, what did you enjoy doing when you were really young? And I mean like before you started school even. What did you enjoy? I enjoyed stories. I enjoyed just looking at art and books. And I made up stories constantly before I learned to read. And once I learned to read, I continued to do the same thing and started, experimenting with writing poems, which I'm terrible at. But I also started experimenting with writing short stories and even with writing novels by the time I was in 5th and 6th grade. So take some clues from that. What did you enjoy doing when you were young? I always like to draw as well, and we'll talk about that. But did you like to sing? Did you like to dance? Did you like to act? Did you enjoy running the lemonade stand? I know that it's kind of a joke at this point, a cliche, but did you enjoy making money? And were you good at it? Some people are just really good at making money. You can be very creative at that. You can be creative at all sorts of things, cooking, whatever, name it. You can be creative at it. Raising children is creative. But when I was young, I've always liked art. I've always liked physical art, like people drawing and painting and things like that. And there are some YouTube channels that I'll talk about, if not today, then later on, that I really admire that are put out by artistic ladies and men. But I'm not really great at that. And here's what's so funny about that. When I was in maybe 9th grade, I decided one day that I'm going to draw. And I took a blank sheet of paper and I went outside in my backyard. We had an old barn out there. And I sat down and drew that barn. And y'all, it was really, really good. I don't know how I did it. I didn't think. I just sat down and I just thought, draw what I see. And it was great. I showed it to my grandmother and she was like, darling, did you do that yourself? And I did. And it was great. And everybody who saw it said, oh my gosh, that's really great. And Grandma took it and put it in her family Bible and I never saw it again. But I tried to do it again after that and I never could do it. I think I got self-conscious. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I never could draw like that again. Never. And I've tried many times in my life. As a matter of fact, if you follow me on Facebook, I put up a few examples of my art and it's quite comical. I haven't given up on that. But I also, always wrote. And I'm not saying that my writing was good when I was young. It actually was probably pretty bad. And I didn't realize how bad it was until I started college. And once I started to take a lot of classes in English literature and started to understand what really good literature was like, I went back and read what I wrote and thought, this is bad. It's really bad. Unfortunately, what never occurred to me was that to get better at something, you have to work at it. And I don't know if I just was distracted by trying to create a life for myself or what the problem was, but I wasn't willing to work at it. As a matter of fact, it never really even occurred to me that I needed to work at it. I'm not sure exactly why that was so, but it was. So then after college, you start getting adult responsibilities. You have to get a job. I mean, I had to find a way to make a living. And then once I had kids, I had to take care of my kids. And as you know, those things are very time consuming and very energy consuming. And I never got back into even trying to be creative after that. Once my kids reached high school, I started thinking sometimes, I really should do something that I enjoy occasionally. Because by then, they didn't need me to drive them around places. And, I stayed plenty busy, but there were down times when I just felt kind of lost. I felt like I didn't know myself anymore. And I didn't know what to do about it. I went through lists of hobbies that you could pick up, but nothing felt fulfilling. Everything seemed too hard. I was just so tired. But what I didn't realize was I was spending a lot of my energy just spinning my wheels, worried about, everyday things, worried about problems, worried about what other people were doing, worried about stuff on my job that, really it would have been better for me to take a break and do something creative, something for myself to get me out of that spinning rut of my mind just going in circles. I'm not sure where I got this book or where I got the idea to get this book, but I got The Artist's Way, A Spiritual Path to Higher Creativity by Julia Cameron. Most of you are probably familiar with this book if you're interested in creativity. I read halfway through it. I got to week 7. Recovering a Sense of Connection is week 7, and that's where I stopped. And the reason I stopped was because once I got to that point, I realized that I had a burning desire to write. And I started with nonfiction because that's what I knew. I'm not going to go into the story behind that. I have other videos that talk about why I wrote the first 2 books I wrote. But I knew that's what I wanted to do, and I could not even stand to finish that book. I didn't want to do the exercises anymore, which, like I said, I have ADHD, and that had something to do with it. But I just wanted to really start on my project, and I haven't looked back. That was 5 years ago, and I've been writing ever since. So I do recommend that book. It is a spark. And another book that I had read back when I was still working my regular job as a librarian was The War of Art, Break Through the Blocks and Win Your Inner Creative Battles by Stephen Pressfield. It says at the bottom, Esquire, a vital gem, a kick in the ass. And it really is. Once you discover what you really want to do, it helps you break through all the BS that you throw in your way, about why I can't do this. Like my excuse of I'm not good at it. BS. It doesn't matter if you're not good at it. If you really want to do it, you'll find a way to get better. I recommend that you sit down and think about, what do you really enjoy? What did you enjoy when you were a child? What, if your wildest dreams could come true, what would you really want to do? Because chances are you can do it. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to make 6 figures a month doing it, especially not to start with. That could happen at some point. Who knows? You have to be pretty lucky to have that happen, I think, even if you do everything right. We're going to talk about that another time, too. The whole world, the early days of the internet, we all had that heady feeling that, oh, yes, all of us can be discovered and we can all make lots of money doing what we enjoy doing. That's not really realistic. But there's more to being creative than making money. It's a gift. I have enjoyed every minute I have worked on my stories and my novels. Every minute that I worked on, well, not every minute that I worked on the nonfiction, but most of it, I really, really, really enjoyed it. And I've enjoyed it ever since. I've enjoyed the fruits of my labor ever since. So that's why you should aspire to be creative. And here are just a list of things that just pop out to me. I'm sure that there are an infinite number of ways that you can be creative. You can make miniatures, miniature little houses, miniature bookstores, whatever, miniature furniture. You can make the surroundings around your home beautiful. Just being, I have a cousin that I admire so much. She is artistic and now she's a landscape architect, but she told me years ago, I want my life to be a work of art. How beautiful. How beautiful that is. There are all sorts of arts, there are all sorts of crafts. You can garden. You can make clothing. You can take things that you find in your closet that you haven't worn in years or that other people have worn, and you can upscale those. Cooking, writing, gifting. Some people are gifted at giving gifts. I mean, what a gorgeous thing that would be, to be able to always make other people happy with the gifts you give them. Entertaining. You can support other people in your community in creative ways. There are all sorts of things that you could do to make your community better if you have a heart for that. It's not selfish to spend your time doing something that gives you joy. Through your joy and through your creations, you can make other people's lives richer. And what a great world it would be if we could all do that, if we could all be happy and we could all share what we have to offer with others and they shared what they offer with us. And instead of making it a competition, we just enjoy each other's offerings. I just think that would be a wonderful world to live in, and I don't think it's impossible. And maybe it is on a global scale right now. Things look pretty bleak. Maybe we're thinking, oh, that's just pie in the sky, but it doesn't have to be for you. It doesn't have to be with the people right around you. You start small. You start with yourself and the people around you, and you build from there. Some habits that cultivate creativity. First off, reading. To me, reading is first and foremost. And there are books on everything. There are inspirational books. There are how-to books. Here's an example. How to Read a Book, The Classic Guide to Intelligent Reading by Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren. I have gone through a series of this book chapter by chapter. I promised that I would finish it, so by golly, I'm going to. Next time we're going to talk about how to read history. That's chapter 16. But there are books on everything. That is my point with this. So reading. Okay, the next is to keep an open mind. Just look around you and think, what could I do right now to improve something? What's one little thing you could do to make your environment better or to make somebody else happy? One little thing. Start there. Small projects. Start with something really small. You don't have to be good at it. You just have to do it. You learn from the process of doing. So one example is junk journaling. I have always loved paper because I like to read, I guess. I love paper crafts. I'm not really good at collages or anything like that, but last fall I started making little teeny tiny collages. Just like we went to West Virginia and stayed at a state park, and I took all the reading material that they gave us for free and cut it up and made some collages. It's not beautiful. It's not going to make money for me in any way, shape, or form, but I enjoy doing it. That's one way to spark your creativity. And if it doesn't work out, so what? It's no big deal. Just move on to something else. Grant yourself the freedom to explore and to do things differently. That's how you do. You start small. You start with little to no expectations. You play. And then once you start to get good at it or you enjoy it, then you start to revise it and get better with time. And in doing so, you will learn, once again, if you've lost the ability to be joyful, you can be joyful. You don't have to be joyful every minute of the day. I realize a lot of terrible things are happening in the world, and we need to be aware of those things, and we need to do what we can. But we don't need to be upset 24 hours a day. We don't need to lose sleep. Find something that brings you a little joy, a little relief, a little reprieve, and then offer it as a gift to others and to yourself. I think, a lot of pressure has been put, especially on women, to make things beautiful and to be beautiful. Beauty's nice, but beauty devoid of truth and love is empty and cold. And ultimately it's going to disappoint. So, if you're aiming to make things gorgeous, I think that was my problem with art. I thought, if I make something, it's got to match what's in my head and it's got to be beautiful. You're missing the point. The point is the joy of doing. But now I'd like to tell you about a short story that I have just finished. It's about what happens when a 65-year-old woman finds out she's a fairy queen. I'll have the link down below. The story is free if you sign up to subscribe to my email. Moving on now to the book I just finished reading that I was telling you about. The author is Kay Redfield Jamison, and she is or used to be, at least at the time she wrote this. This book was published in 2017. She was a professor of mood disorders and a psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins University. And she also had an honorary English degree from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. So this woman knows what she's talking about. And Robert Lowell was one of the greatest 20th century poets. He came from a family of mentally ill people. They had bipolar disorder at the time when Lowell was alive. It was commonly called manic depressive disorder, and sometimes still is. He inherited this from quite a few of his ancestors, and he had a very severe case of it himself. Lowell says about himself, "But the courage to live with madness and the knowledge that I will return is as real as zigzagging to a machine gun nest." That's how he looked at all his episodes. He started getting ill decades before lithium was out to control the illness, and he would just be hit with madness all of a sudden. He would be perfectly normal, a nice, kind man who loved his friends, who loved his family, and then all of a sudden his mind would just start to race, and he would become grandiose, and he would become sometimes violent. But his writing would also greatly take off at these times, and then he would have to be hospitalized. He would become completely delusional and psychotic, and he would wind up in a hospital. This happened to him over and over and over again, and he had no control over when it would happen. It was really a sad story. Jameson talks about a study done by Nancy Andreasen, a psychiatrist at the University of Iowa, who in 1987 studied writers at the renowned Iowa Writers Workshop. She found out that 80% of the people attending the Iowa Writers Workshop at the time she did the study, 80% met the diagnostic criteria for a mood disorder, and nearly half of them for bipolar disorder. So that's amazing. She spends the first part of the book talking about his ancestors and how so many of them were severely affected by this disorder. And then she goes through his history with the illness up through the late 1960s when he started lithium. And that greatly reduced the number of manic episodes he had. It didn't eliminate them. I think he still had 2 after that, and one was right before he died. But she doesn't get to that to the end of the book. Or in between those parts, she talks about the connection between mental illness and creative work, and how it just really does seem to spur connections in the brains of people who have it. And poets especially tend to have bipolar disorder, and that is so strange. I personally know one person that I would consider a poet, and she has bipolar disorder. I just think that's amazing. So at the end of the book, the end of his life, the last 7 years, he married the writer Jean Shepherd to start with. He always was romantically involved with women writers, almost always. So he was involved with Jean Shepherd. They got a divorce, and he married Elizabeth Hardwick, and she lived with him for a couple of decades. He constantly, whenever he would go into a manic phase, he would have an affair. That was one of the first signs that he was going manic. He would have an affair. He was very cruel to her, but then she understood that he was mentally ill. This was not who he was, and so she stuck with him, and he was grateful to her for that. So it was a beautiful love story. But then after he started lithium, he left her for a final time for his third wife, Caroline Blackwood, a writer in England. And Caroline Blackwood was an alcoholic, and they had problems of their own, and it didn't last. And right before he died, he went back to his second wife, Elizabeth Hardwick. It was an upsetting story. You know, he was not a perfect person. The illness did not explain everything he did wrong, but we all do things wrong. We all mess up. The last section of this book is the one that really interested me. The last section is about his death and his funeral, but then the very last chapter was the best chapter of the entire book. I got the feeling from reading this, and I hadn't read anything else about the author, that she was a poet, or she had a poet's soul. This book is poetic in a lot of ways, and I always appreciate that in prose. I think it's gorgeous. But in the last chapter, she analyzes what is considered by many, and by Lowell himself, to be his best poem. It's called For the Union Dead, and it's about Robert Shaw and the 54th Union Regiment in the Civil War. If you've ever seen the movie Glory that starred Denzel Washington and Matthew Broderick, it came out in the 90s, I think. It was a wonderful movie. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. That it was a Negro regiment that fought in the Civil War, I think the first one. And it's about, that's what the story is about. Lowell was from Boston. He had ancestors who came in on the Mayflower. He was descended from ministers. He was descended from all sorts of important people in the founding of America, and he grappled with that. He grappled with the greatness of America, which he always believed in, but he also grappled with its flaws. I'm going to read you part of this, the last chapter on page 394. For the Union Dead pulls together many strands of Lowell's thinking and experience. It combines his public voice and political conscience with autobiography. Bound in history, it is first and foremost an American poem. It stares into the American character as an eagle gazes into the sun. It is about a nation born in courage and descending into slack and rust. It is about valor and the corruption of valor. It asks, which noble acts, which right things done, enter and stay in memory? What remains? What can be preserved? When art memorializes acts of courage and high deeds, can it stand against indifference? Is decay, moral, civic, and savage servility inevitable? Oh, that gives me chills because obviously things do tend to go through cycles. You can reach heights, but it seems to be the human condition that even as societies, we are going to crash down. So that's my talk about creativity. If you're interested in that sort of thing, if you have ever suspected that you may have poetic talents that might be connected to mental illness, I highly recommend that you read this book. I wish you for the next week or so that you spend some time exploring your own creative potential and have fun doing it. That's all for today. Thank you for listening.